There's a significant development unfolding in the Middle East, one that has barely been mentioned in Washington. It's crucial to grasp the full meaning of this shift, because missing it could lead to a misunderstanding of the geopolitical landscape for the next decade. Let me ask you something simple. Amidst the escalating tensions of a trade war and increasing tariffs, why would China choose to expand its influence both militarily and economically in the Persian Gulf? Why now? Why there? And why form a closer bond with Iran? The answer to these questions will tell you more than just about trade. It reveals the true nature of China's ambitions and provides a window into something much deeper and more irreversible than just tariff disputes. Let's talk about the Strait of Hormuz for a moment. If you say the words Strait of Hormuz, take a second to recognize their weight. This narrow waterway, located between Iran and Oman, is a vital passage through which approximately 20% of the world's oil flows. But this is no ordinary shipping lane. It's the lifeblood of the global economy. Whoever controls this waterway holds the power to influence every nation that relies on oil. In other words, they hold the leverage over nearly every country on Earth. For over 50 years, the United States has fully understood the importance of this region. This is why the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet is stationed in Bahrain, and why American aircraft carrier groups have been deployed to the Persian Gulf since the Carter Doctrine of 1980. The core of America's post-World War II strategy in the Middle East has been built around a singular principle. No hostile nation can gain control over the Strait of Hormuz. However, something has changed. China has shifted the strategic equation in a quiet but profound way. They've done it subtly, almost patiently, and at a moment when the Trump administration, with all its aggressive rhetoric about confronting China, either didn't foresee it coming or didn't have the tools to prevent it. China's relationship with Iran isn't new. In fact, in 2021, China and Iran formalized a comprehensive strategic partnership, a deal worth up to $400 billion over a 25-year period, aimed at strengthening cooperation in infrastructure, energy, and military matters. But for the past 3 years, this agreement has been slowly taking shape under the radar. While the world focused on issues like Ukraine, Gaza, and the South China Sea, China's engagement in the region has been steadily ramping up. Now, it's accelerating. Chinese firms are building key port infrastructure along Iran's southern coastline. Chinese naval vessels are conducting joint military exercises with Iran and Russia in the Gulf of Oman. At the same time, Chinese investment is pouring into Iran's energy sector at a time when Western sanctions have made Iran economically desperate and, in many ways, strategically vulnerable. Iran, in need of economic support, is increasingly looking to China as a partner, and China, for the first time in its history, has the leverage to plant its presence firmly in the region, not with military bases, but through an economic and strategic footprint that effectively places the Strait of Hormuz under Chinese influence. This move is not just about asserting military power, it's about China securing a position of control over a critical global choke point. This isn't just a fleeting moment in the history of international relations. What China is doing in the Gulf is reshaping the way power is distributed in the Middle East and beyond. Washington may not be openly addressing this shift, but it's happening, and the ramifications will be felt far and wide. Now, here's where it gets even more interesting, something the Trump administration, despite its tough stance on China, seems to have overlooked. The administration entered office promising to be tough on Beijing, tariffs, technology restrictions, and a broader decoupling of the two economies. The rhetoric has been maximalist, aiming to confront China head-on. However, this strategic move in the Persian Gulf shows that Beijing has quietly outmaneuvered the U.S. in a region it has long considered its own sphere of influence. While much of the focus in recent months has been on trade issues, semiconductors, electric vehicles, rare earths, China has quietly pursued an entirely different strategy, one that operates on the geopolitical stage. Far from being bogged down in the trade war, China is playing a broader game, maneuvering in areas where the United States has far less influence, fewer resources, and crucially, less attention. Take a moment to consider what China has accomplished in the past 18 months. One of the most significant developments was China's role in brokering the normalization of relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran, two nations that have spent decades locked in a bitter, often covert, proxy conflict. The fact that these two rivals sat down together in Beijing should have been a wake-up call for every intelligence agency in Washington. This wasn't about symbolism. China wasn't just facilitating a handshake for the sake of appearances. No, it was because Beijing understood something crucial. If China could neutralize the long-standing Sunni-Shia divide in the Persian Gulf, if they could get Saudi Arabia and Iran to engage in dialogue rather than conflict, it would remove a key obstacle to China's influence in the region. By fostering this rapprochement, China is effectively reshaping the dynamics of the Gulf, turning a region that was once a hotbed of American military presence into a space where the U.S. role might start to appear less like a stabilizing force and more like an unwanted guest. But that's not all. In Yemen, the situation has been just as revealing. The Houthis, backed by Iran, have been attacking shipping in the Red Sea, leading to strikes by American and British forces on Houthi positions. However, amidst all of this chaos, there is one country that has maintained open diplomatic channels with both Iran and Saudi Arabia, the one country that hasn't fired a single missile, China. While others are embroiled in the regional conflict, China has emerged as the one nation that can navigate this complex terrain without being directly involved in the fighting. This positioning is no accident. It reflects a long-term, deliberate strategy. By positioning itself as the only major global power capable of engaging with all sides in a fractured and often hostile world, China is crafting an image of itself as the indispensable broker in an increasingly multipolar global system. This approach is marked by a consistency and patience that offers China an advantage, especially when compared to the reactive and often short-term nature of view. Hess foreign policy. China isn't seeking dominance through overt military confrontation. Instead, Beijing is exerting its influence through persistence, predictability, and a calm, calculated engagement with opposing blocs. The goal is clear: to secure lasting influence through quiet but firm involvement, rather than through the dramatic displays of power that often characterize American foreign policy. Now, consider what it means when we say that the Strait of Hormuz is becoming China's domain. This is not about military control or visible patrols. It's not about establishing a base or showing force with gunboats. What China is doing is far more subtle and arguably more enduring. In the modern geopolitical landscape, true control over a vital choke point like the Strait of Hormuz doesn't necessarily require military presence. Instead, it's about shaping the very conditions under which that choke point operates. China is creating this influence by cultivating economic dependencies, establishing diplomatic ties with all the relevant players, and embedding itself physically through major infrastructure investments. By combining these three pillars, economic leverage, diplomatic access, and logistical presence, China is building an influence that is less visible than military dominance, but often far more resilient and far-reaching. China's deepening relationship with Iran is a key element of this broader strategy. Through long-term agreements, particularly in energy and infrastructure, China is gaining significant leverage over Iran's strategic decisions, especially when it comes to energy flows and regional stability. At the same time, China is maintaining strong relationships with other Gulf Arab states, including Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar. This combination of influence and presence is reshaping the balance of power in the Middle East, and it's something that the United States, despite its historical dominance in the region, may soon find it difficult to counter. China, by acting patiently and strategically, is quietly positioning itself to become the most consequential power in the Persian Gulf, without firing a single shot. By engaging with both Iran and Saudi Arabia, China is positioning itself as the only major power capable of maintaining an open dialogue across the region's most contentious divisions. Unlike other powers, China doesn't require ideological allegiance. Instead, it focuses on offering economic cooperation, building infrastructure, and maintaining diplomatic balance. In this way, China presents itself not as a source of conflict, but as a stabilizing force, a partner who reduces the need for military confrontation while safeguarding its own strategic interests. This stands in sharp contrast to the approach taken by the United States during the Trump administration, which was rooted in confrontation. Washington's strategy of maximum pressure on Iran came with the expectation that regional allies would align against both Tehran and Beijing. Efforts like the Abraham Accords were a part of a broader attempt to reshape the regional order. Yet these initiatives fundamentally required countries to pick sides, pushing them to make choices that could undermine long-term stability. China, however, offers something different. Its strategy does not demand firm alignment or loyalty. Instead, it suggests a model based on mutual economic growth, non-interference, and inclusive diplomacy, values that appeal to Gulf nations seeking both stability and economic diversification. This approach has proved more attractive to many in the region, leading them to pursue a strategy of hedging their bets. As a result, several key players in the Gulf have begun shifting their economic priorities. Saudi Arabia, for example, now exports more oil to China than to any other nation. This marks a clear pivot in the kingdom's economic orientation. Meanwhile, the United Arab Emirates, UAE, has become a vital financial hub for China, playing a central role in transactions that can bypass Western sanctions. Even Qatar, which hosts one of the largest U.S. military bases in the region, continues to deepen its energy and investment ties with Beijing. These actions are not signs of disloyalty to the United States. Instead, they are rational decisions made in response to a rapidly changing global order. The cumulative effect of these shifts is a steady rebalancing of influence in the Persian Gulf, with China increasingly positioned as a central player. What sets this change apart is the nature of the tools that China is employing. The United States has relied primarily on tariffs, export controls, and direct bilateral pressure, tools suited for economic competition, but less effective for long-term geopolitical positioning in a region that is deeply shaped by relationships and infrastructure. China, in contrast, is making long-term investments in ports, energy projects, and contracts that lock in influence for decades. These are not decisions that can be easily undone. Once supply chains are established, they create dependencies that are costly to untangle. Similarly, diplomatic ties formed through sustained engagement tend to deepen over time, as opposed to relationships built on conditional support. This is why the timeline matters. Unlike the short-term cycles of American politics, China is focused on long-term generational strategies. It's not concerned with election cycles or political shifts. Rather, it is embedding itself into the core structures of global trade and energy networks. The Persian Gulf, as the nexus of a significant portion of the world's oil supply, is central to this vision. China is not seizing control of the Strait of Hormuz in the traditional sense. Rather, it is redefining what control means. Through economic integration, diplomatic inclusivity, and strategic patience, China is increasing its influence in the region. It is shaping the environment around this key choke point by ensuring that it has embedded itself within the structures of both energy and trade, slowly becoming indispensable to all involved. The broader takeaway is that some of the most important changes in global power dynamics aren't necessarily the most visible ones. While the public's focus often rests on trade wars, tariffs, and technology disputes, the deeper shift is occurring in regions like the Persian Gulf. Through a combination of steady economic engagement, diplomatic balancing, and long-term infrastructure projects, China is quietly but surely expanding its sway in one of the world's most vital regions. If this trajectory continues, the balance of power in the Gulf, and by extension the global balance, could shift not through visible conflict, but through the quiet accumulation of structural advantages. This new model of influence is not about overt domination, but about crafting long-lasting relationships that shape the future of global power. And in the Persian Gulf, this strategy is unfolding one quiet decision at a time.